I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be. Let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. And when the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer, let it be. For though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. There will be an answer, let it be. And when the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine on till tomorrow, let it be. I wake up to the sound of music, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. There will be an answer, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be.
Good afternoon and welcome to this worshiping community that we call the First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ of Norman, Oklahoma. Now, we've been quite tangibly reminded these past several weeks that the church is not a building, but a people. And so for this season of social distancing and other safety measures, we continue to worship online because we believe, as Jesus of Nazareth taught, that we find him among the most vulnerable in our society. So by worshiping in this way, we seek to really embody what we say we believe. And we're doing our best to protect the most vulnerable among our congregation, our communities, our state, our nation, and even our world. Here at First Congregational Church of Norman, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. If you join me in this type of affirmation, please head to the comments section and type, "You are welcome here." It's what we do. It's who we are. It's who we seek to become more fully. Today is the third Sunday of this Easter season by the Christian calendar. In the gospel text selected from Luke today, we find a very famous story of the disciples' encounter with Jesus on the road to Emmaus. Now, they did not recognize him until he broke the bread. For us today, I wonder, are there lessons to be learned by coming face to face with our own brokenness and despair? Where might we see Jesus? I think today's scripture lesson suggests that we can find Jesus when we lean into our brokenness, the brokenness right in front of us. I don't mean the ghost of Jesus, literally, but we find life, we find hope, we find meaning when we find the courage and the faith to lean into the brokenness right in front of us. So today I'm hopeful that we will offer a relevant message to where we all seem to be living in these days of COVID-19. Here at First Congregational Church, we are doing our very best to stay connected virtually through the channels available to us. We have some opportunities I want to just raise before you now briefly. On Thursday evenings at 7 p.m., Ariana Martin and Abby Kerr lead a really nice time, usually 10 to 15 minutes worth of music. It's on our Facebook page. You can tune in right at 7. Of course, it's available anytime after that, but if you're there live, you get the benefit of interacting with other members of our community, which is really one of the major highlights of that whole thing, in addition to the fantastic music they provide. And we also have some other opportunities we're working on to gather virtually through Zoom for fellowship and educational purposes as well. You also have been so good to support the work of the church, those who are able, through giving. And here's that online giving information, also the mailing address and so forth. Just feel the need to put that there since we are having to do things in a different way. Now let's begin. Now would you please join me for our call to worship? As we begin, I would invite you to read responsively those portions that show up on the screen in yellow. Through the prophets, ancient and new, we come to understand differently the story of us. God frees us from evil's deceit and lifts the veil from our perception. We are not powerless before evil. We are not without hope. we need not be afraid. Though destruction comes our way, we are still healers, community builders, makers of beauty, cultivators of delight. We are abundant in wisdom, and together our courage abounds. We will not be led astray by untruths that close our hearts off to the life that remains. God is not dead, but alive. We press on together by the power of love.
Open my eyes that I may see glimpses of truth thou hast for me. Place in my hands the wonderful key that shall unclasp and set me free. Silently now I wait for thee, ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. Open my ears that I may hear voices of truth thou sendest clear, and while the wave notes fall on my ear, everything false will disappear. Silently now I wait for thee, ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. Open my mouth and let me bear gladly the one truth everywhere. Open my heart and let me prepare love with thy children thus to share. Silently now I wait for thee, ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my heart, illumine me, Spirit divine.
Hey everybody, I hope you guys are having a good Sunday. Today I want to talk about standing up for what you believe in and doing what you know is right, even if it's scary. There's a little story about this, and it's about a boy named Jonathan and his family. So he's with his mom and his dad and his little sister, and they're going on a trip to visit a temple. So they go to the temple and they're walking around, they're exploring. There's a courtyard, and they're just walking all around the grounds and getting to see the place. And after they've been walking around for a while, his parents decide that they want to stop and take a break. And so while his parents are sitting down and cooling off, he decides to keep on going around and exploring a little bit on his own. So while Jonathan went off to explore by himself, he came across these booths which were all selling different animals of all different types. There were doves, bulls, sheep, and all sorts of things. And all of the animals were being sold for a really high price, and Jonathan knew that his family could only afford to buy doves, even though they really wanted to buy a bull because it was more special to them, but they didn't have the money for it. Seeing all of these really cool animals that his family couldn't afford made him a little, he felt bummed out, so he started to go back to where his mom and little sister were when he heard some people arguing from the stalls that he had just been at. And so he went and he turned back around and he sees a man. The man was holding a whip and he was knocking over tables, and just money was flying everywhere. He was tearing the stalls apart, and Jonathan wondered what on earth was going on. And so he heard the man say to stop turning my father's house into a marketplace. And Jonathan wondered what he meant by that. He thought maybe his father was a priest, a higher priest, but it didn't seem likely, so he was kind of confused by that. So in that story, the man who was tearing up the stalls was actually Jesus. I wanted to let them know that it was wrong for them to be selling their animals in the place of worship. And so even though Jesus knew that nobody really, the priests or anyone else at the temple, would believe him when he claimed that it was his father's place, his father's marketplace, he still stood his ground and stood up for what he believed in. So there's a really good lesson in that story to always speak your mind and do what you know is right, even if it'll make people look at you funny or think that you're different or weird or anything like that, which I know that can be something really hard to do. It can be kind of scary when maybe there's a lot of people at school doing something that you know should not be going on, and it can be hard to be the one to try and stop them. It's important to remember that when you know you have God on your side, it can make standing up for the right thing a lot less scary. Hope you enjoyed that story today, and I hope that these little mini lessons have been keeping your guys' spirits up. They definitely have been for me. So yeah, thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you later.
Now we have the opportunity to really participate and interact as a community. Many of you already know this routine, but if you need a reminder or if you're new with us, one thing we like to do during a song each week as we worship virtually like this is to share our joys, those things we want to celebrate, and then share our concerns, those things that are heavy on our hearts today. So I would encourage you to lead out, if you want to share a joy, with the word joy so others know it's something you're celebrating, or concern if it's something that you want people to join you in prayer for or about. You can reply to those comments. TBTG stands for Thanks Be to God, if it's a joy maybe, or GHOP, that's GHOP, God hear our prayer, if it's a concern, or feel free to use the like or love button to show your support, or of course, many of you are so creative that you can insert your own reply and show concern and care and joy in your own ways. Let us do so now during the singing of this next song.
Taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your will have every victory. Oh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe.
Thank you so much for the amazing ways that you show concern and care, and also that you share joy with your siblings in the faith here each week during Joys and Concerns. It's a tremendous blessing to one another and to this pastor to see you do that the way that you do that. Would you now join me as I lead in a pastoral prayer? Let us pray. Holy stranger, at times we do not recognize you. We have inherited beliefs and patterns of behavior that so often narrow our perception. We generally have our minds so firmly entrenched, in fact, in our own preconceived notions of what you should look like, where you should appear, and what we should feel like when we're happy, that we actually are pretty unreliable witnesses as to what mystery, beauty, or happiness, or any of the rest should look or feel like, even during normal circumstances. We're not quite sure how we got to this place, Holy One, but we do know that we want to be wiser. We do know that we want to be happier. We do know that we want to recognize you, and we want to be inspired when we encounter love and beauty, peace and justice, and to feel connected to all that is holy. Just as the disciples finally recognized Jesus when he broke the bread, may we recognize you among the broken places in our own lives, Holy One. Wherever there is heartache, wherever there is depression or anger or frustration or pain, you are already there, and you meet us there. Wherever there is anxiety, wherever there is uncertainty, wherever all hope seems lost, you are already there even before we recognize you. Our temptation is to run from our own discomfort. But what we are learning is that when we run from our discomfort, it merely jogs alongside us and waits for us to notice it once again. This time, help us learn to be brave enough to deal with our own discomfort and brokenness, to name it, to look straight at it, and when we do, may we find you once again meeting us right at the places that hurt the most. Yes, even and especially may we find you near the broken places of our lives. And now would you join me in reciting a contemporary version of the Lord's Prayer? Our Creator, who is in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For you reign in the power that is love, now and always. Amen. now a reading from the Gospel according to Luke, 24th chapter, beginning in verse 13, reading through verse 35. On that same day, 2 disciples were traveling to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking to each other about everything that had happened, and while they were discussing these things, Jesus himself arrived and joined them on the journey. They were prevented from recognizing him. He said to them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" They stopped, their faces downcast. The one named Cleopas replied, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who is unaware of the things that have taken place over the last few days?" He said to them, "What things?" They said to him, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth. Because of his powerful deeds and words, he was recognized by God and all the people as a prophet. But our chief priests and our leaders handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the one who would redeem Israel. All these things happened 3 days ago. But there's more. Some women from our group have left us stunned. They went to the tomb early this morning and didn't find his body. They came to us saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who told them he is alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women said. They did not see him." Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, your dull minds keep you from believing all that the prophets talked about. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then he interpreted for them the things written about himself in all the scriptures, starting with Moses and going through all the prophets. And when they came to Emmaus, he acted as if he was going on ahead. But they urged him, saying, "Stay with us. It's nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. After he took his seat at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, but he disappeared from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts on fire when he spoke to us along the road and when he explained the scriptures for us?" They got up right then and returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying to each other, "The Lord really has risen. He appeared to Simon." Then the 2 disciples described what had happened along the road and how Jesus was made known to them as he broke the bread. Here ends the reading. May God grant us wisdom and courage for its interpretation. Thanks be to God. You know, the story of the road to Emmaus is perhaps one of the strangest of the resurrection appearance stories. For Jesus must have been with Cleopas and his friend for several hours. Now, most of the resurrection appearance stories are fairly fleeting. Usually Jesus appears unexpectedly, speaks to the disciples, and then promptly disappears again. But we're told Emmaus was 7 miles from Jerusalem. That's at least a 2-hour walk. And after Jesus remained until a meal had been prepared, he put the time to good use. Apparently, he explained and interpreted all the scriptures to Cleopas and his friend, starting with Moses and all the prophets, and still the 2 disciples failed to recognize him. Now, I find that very strange. How can you fail to recognize someone you know so well? Now, I frequently fail to remember names, but it's a lot more rare that I fail to recognize people that I know and that I know well. Now, just the other day, a friend was making posts on social media. It was pretty humorous, actually. And he was promising he was going to cut his own hair in light of all of our present situations and circumstances. And with the restrictions of COVID-19, he was playing it safe and he was staying isolated in his own home. But after some encouragement from a few of us online, he posted the picture of his post-haircut appearance, let's call it. And I'll be honest, I had to look several times in order to recognize him. Now, I finally pinpointed the fact that it wasn't his actual haircut that made his new look so shocking to me. After a bit of joking around, I asked what had happened to his eyebrows. Turns out his shocking new look had more to do with the fact that he had used his beard trimmer on the lowest setting to trim his once dark, prominent, and, well, even bushy eyebrows. And now, well, now they were but a faint shadow of their once bushy selves. Now, even with all that said and a little bit of laughing, I still recognized my friend. And yet in our story today, although these disciples' hearts burned within them while the stranger was speaking, the two disciples weren't even reminded of Jesus. The horrifying events of the trial and crucifixion had to have had Jesus on their minds very much, yet they noticed no resemblance in our story at all between the stranger they met on the road and their beloved Jesus. There must not have been any visible wounds on the hands or the feet or the sides of Jesus in this visionary experience of theirs, as there were later that same day when he appeared in the upper room, as our faith stories tell us, to more of the disciples. So either what they noticed in this story on the road to Emmaus, or else their vision of the risen Jesus was quite different from the Jesus they had known before the crucifixion. It has long been fascinating to me that the post-Easter vision of Jesus was seen and observed so differently by different groups of people, or even the same on different days. And they recognized him through different situations and characteristics. Mary Magdalene recognized him when he spoke her name. The gathered disciples recognized him, well, when they looked at his wounds. This Emmaus pair here in our reading today recognized him through the breaking of bread. They recognized Jesus when they saw him in that filter of brokenness. The journey to Emmaus, as the author of Luke's Gospel tells it, it must have been a terrific experience for them. It centered around Jesus. The talk was not only about Jesus, but by Jesus. But for everything he said, for all the teachings he gave them, they still did not recognize him. What could the author of this gospel be trying to evoke in the minds and hearts of the original readers of this story by telling it this way? They only recognized him when he stopped speaking and teaching and started doing. And the thing that he started doing was that which enabled them to recognize him. And this thing was breaking bread and giving it to them. Maybe the author, we can call him Luke, I suppose, maybe there's something important going on here the author wants us to notice. Maybe it's in the breaking. Maybe it is the breaking. Maybe it's the brokenness of something, maybe even something special, that jogs their minds into a clearer vision and reality in that moment. Brokenness, friends, is a vital part of the Christian experience because it strips away all the layers, all the veneer, if you will, and reveals the real, trembling, naked, vulnerable person that's underneath. That's why I think Jesus enjoyed the company of the social outcasts so very much, because they were broken and vulnerable people who had no veneer left to peel away. The social outcasts Jesus spent so much time with in his ministry, as we're told in the Gospels, these social outcasts used their energy not to build defenses around themselves, not to try to appear to have everything together in their lives, not to create an acceptable social manner, but they used their energy simply to survive and to live their lives. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating poverty and all its evils as a way of life to be sought after in order to gain spiritual benefit. No, far from it. We need to support those on the margins of our societies in every possible way. Now, fortunately, for most of us, brokenness is not a way of life in the same way as it was for those poor folks during Jesus' time. We're not, most of us, on the margins. Many of us may not be rich, but neither are we dragged down by the first-hand grind of poverty on a daily basis in our everyday existence. What I am suggesting then is that for most of us, brokenness tends to come differently. Like the clergy colleague of mine whose 22-year-old daughter was married one January and then just 6 weeks later was diagnosed as suffering from cancer. You can imagine the devastation of the whole family and especially the young couple themselves. And there are countless ways that human beings can experience real and devastating brokenness. Bereavement, divorce, serious illness, all are occasions of brokenness. They're occasions of immense suffering when energy is used simply for survival and there's no spare energy to worry about social niceties or what other people may or may not think about you. I think right now, for many in our congregation and certainly in the communities across Oklahoma, the stress, the isolation, the fear of how long this season of COVID-19 isolation and all of the many effects of this outbreak will linger, it's truly beginning to wear on us. We all have different situations, and we're all handling it differently. For those whose livelihoods have not been severely impacted, it's easy to criticize those who are out protesting to reopen businesses and remove some of the restrictions. And while I disagree in principle with these demands some of the protesters, like I mentioned, are making, and think that it would be a bad idea in the grand scheme of things for the health of our society just to reopen everything before we're all on the other side of the peak of this outbreak, I cannot minimize their fears, their suffering, or, to put it another way, the brokenness that they happen to be experiencing. And I think it's really important that when we see actions or reactions that we might personally think are foolish or misinformed or misguided right now, that we realize that there is a sense of brokenness driving most of these actions and anxieties. Now, these sorts of occasions, like COVID-19, they strip us and leave us with no sense of control, little or no resources of our own, or at least the ones we're accustomed to, and nothing impactful that we feel like we can offer to improve the situation. We're forced in situations like these to lean heavily on other people and to rely on their strength because we may have precious little of our own strength. During these occasions, it is so difficult not to let our pride in our own independence blind us to the reality of the current situations. And then there's the other incredibly difficult part of situations like this: learning to accept other people's help. Most of us do not do that very well. As incredibly challenging and uncomfortable as all of these types of situations truly are, all of these occasions are also filters through which we can learn to recognize Jesus. Now, I'm not suggesting we look for his ghost, but I am suggesting that Jesus represents the hope of new life and new possibilities for us, even in the middle of our short-sighted, blinding grief or suffering. We will each recognize him in different ways through different events. So did the disciples. Hope and possibility may not appear in just the form we expect. Jesus did not for any of the disciples. We may not be aware that we've been walking with hope right under our noses, just at an arm's length, even through many of the difficult places in our journey. Why is that? Because we carry the grief and despair right on top of us so squarely that we cannot often see beyond it. This seemed to be the case for the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. But all those disciples who met Jesus after his resurrection, they were changed by the encounter. And that's the litmus test of any encounter with the risen Christ, as experienced by most of us as hope, as new possibilities for transformation, for a fresh start, for redemption, that shining moment where things take on a new sense of light and hope for today and perhaps even beyond. We too are changed when we recognize the newness of hope breaking into our dark, grief-filled, anxiety-driven moments of brokenness. This hope, this appearance of life, radically changes our perspective, the way we view life itself. We become different people with different values and different priorities, even if we only begin to realize we've been with Jesus after the event is over. We realize that we were never quite as abandoned as we might have thought we were. We might realize after the fact that we were never quite as alone or never quite as hopeless as we thought we were at the time. Now, it is possible to experience brokenness without becoming desperately poor and without the sort of traumatic shock which plunges us straight into it. It's possible to experience brokenness by becoming increasingly aware of our real selves, by voluntarily allowing the social veneers of our own lives to be stripped away, by allowing ourselves to be open and transparent with other people, by allowing ourselves to admit to what we really think and what we really feel. I'm not suggesting that this season of quarantine and isolation is a good thing by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly does offer us the chance to embrace some of the deeper realities of who we truly are at the deepest and most personal levels. And this sort of self-awareness quickly leads to an encounter with the risen Christ, and we will be changed by it. You know something, just in the two congregations I happen to be privileged to serve as pastor, I know of at least 3 different individuals and or families who have realized during this time of isolation the incredible value of repairing broken relationships, some with family, some with close friends in their past, and other loved ones. In all 3 of these cases that I personally know about, right here in these 2 congregations I serve, it took one person to reach out, and then others responded positively with kindness and compassion. And now, in all of these situations, people are talking by phone or by FaceTime or by Zoom regularly, and it's like they've been given a completely new start where things once were thought to be dead and disconnected before. I wonder if there might be other ways of using this season in our lives, where brokenness seems to be the rule of the day, in order to leverage new hope, restored relationships, maybe to foster a new sense of life in unexpected ways, with unexpected people in unexpected places. They were saying to each other, verse 34 once again, "The Lord really has risen. He appeared to Simon." And then the two disciples described what had happened along the road and how Jesus was made known to them as he broke the bread. Sometimes, dear ones, we have to come face to face with what is broken before it can be made whole again. May God grant us the courage to lean into the broken places in our own lives, so that when we least expect it, we too will find life and hope where death and despair once dwelled. Amen.
When the poor ones who have nothing share with strangers, when the thirsty want to give unto us all, when the crippled in their weakness strengthen others, then we know that God still goes that road with us. Then we know that God still goes that road with us. When at last all those who suffer find their comfort, when they hope though even hope seems hopelessness, when we love through hate at times seems all around us, then we know that God still goes that road with us. Then we know that God still goes that road with us.
Hope meets us right on the streets we walk in our everyday lives. Beauty and healing await us, even in the middle of our brokenness. It is not necessary for us to pretend we are already ready for the next chapter, but when our eyes are ready to see and our hearts are ready to hope again, God still goes this road with us, even as we're still learning to love one another, every single other. Amen.